Thank you so much for having me. So the title of my talk is whether we are seeing a new era for global coordination. I'm going to expose my opinion that it is. Right now, coordination in our societies happens mostly through bureaucracy. That's the way in which we are able to organize and scale most of our public and privately owned big private organizations. Organizations generally have to decide, and they have rules and governance and process what to do, and then act on those decisions. How to decide has different granularity levels, right? That's where we use bureaucracy. It's different how we organize the Department of Vehicles and driving permits than how we organize the Supreme Court of Justice, for example. And how to act is also part of the organizational design of all these private and public organizations. And they are in continuous social change. There are new kinds of organizations that I think that we still don't understand correctly, which are called DAOs. It stands for Decentralized Autonomous, and I'm not quite sure if this is a correct taxonomy, where to put them next to public or private or NGO organizations. But the first one of these was the internet. The internet is decentralized in the sense that there's no big central planning, and most of our devices just know how to act, how to communicate with each other with no need to connect to a central party. And there is no internet big corporation that could be taken down. Some governments have tried though, but you cannot shut down the internet because it's autonomous in this sense. Now, this is not the kind of DAO that I think will start to change the world, but rather DAOs based on smart contracts, based on programming code, programming the rules that we are currently enforcing through bureaucracy. The rules and laws that we need to define how the DAO decide and act are coded in the Ethereum blockchain or other blockchains, and they generally can mimic how the current systems work. For example, the Supreme Court of Justice, in the case of Argentina or the United States, it's a simple majority vote or supermajority vote. And once that decision is made, then it's enacted by different officials. But you also have different organizations, like, for example, private corporations, where you have voting shares and different mechanisms, boards of directors, and also the enactment of those decisions and how they trickle down the organizational ladder. With DAOs, we can encode these on the Ethereum blockchain, and all of these decisions can be automated. Maybe before it was automated with SAP, SAP, or some other custom-made software, and we have different websites in which the decisions are published and enacted. But in the general sense, I think that the interesting part about DAOs is that the enactment of the decisions, because it's on the Ethereum blockchain, it can happen automatically, and that reduces the risk for corruption and maybe breach of contract. But that can only happen if the decision is a blockchain native one. For example, with on-chain tokenization of shares, a financial investment firm can decide to buy shares of another company, as long as those shares are encoded on the same blockchain as the DAO that decided to buy those tokens lives on. This already exists in different ways, but it's a very small thing. And what also exists is organizations making decisions and acting. When a financial institution decides to buy something, then there's a lot of identity verification and trusted controllers that go through a bureaucratic process in order to enact the decision of investing in that other firm. But now with DAOs, the decision can be made automatically and the shares are automatically put to the balance sheet of the fund. In what we're seeing right now with DAOs, some of those actions that the DAOs execute are on-chain actions, and some of those are just opinions. The problem with opinions is that the performance of that opinion is unauditable, and in that sense, we are not better than what we currently have. But when the action can be executed on chain, we can be sure that it's going to be executed exactly as the governance of the organization decided to, because it's code. And it also enables us to play a little with how to decide on that governance. For example, we're seeing a delegation of votes with the Decentraland DAO, where I maybe have some voting power in order to participate, but I don't want to be in the day-to-day operation of it. So I pick a candidate and I delegate my voting power to that person. The DAO also has to decide how to distribute that voting power, how those decisions are made. And in Decentraland, we created a structure for giving power to the community based on how many wearables do you have, how many cryptocurrency tokens of Decentraland do you have. And what we have right now is that nobody owns it. It's like today's big mega corporations or the government. The public owns the virtual world. So what does this mean? For example, the clothes that the avatars can wear, well, there's a mechanism of curation, and somebody has to decide whether those wearables are technically correct. And that's still something that only a human can do. So the DAO, through a community-weighted vote, decides on a set of elected officials that decide whether the wearables are accepted or not. Or, for example, we have a grant program to develop new features for this virtual world, which is completely open source. And through a grant mechanism, they receive a compensation for improving this virtual world. This is all voted and decided by the community, which owns voting power in the shape of having NFTs inside of the game, or like land or names, or the same wearable clothes that you can create, give you an ability and a voice to decide on the DAO. And we've been organizing our group or DAO in different separation. There's a wearables committee, there's a security committee that watches over for the security of the smart contracts. There's a governance squad that is in charge of facilitating and communicating all the decisions that the DAO makes. The DAO committee, which enacts certain actions that are not completely on chain. And there's now a new grant squad, which is making sure that the grants are doing a following of what the different grantees have received. And this is overall an example of how we achieved an organization that lives fully on chain. There's people involved in many of these jobs and in many of these responsibilities. And in general, we created a fully sustainable mechanism. Our business model is based on the activity, the economic activity in the virtual world. And that activity, the fees and the fees that are extracted from the economic activity in this virtual world go back to the DAO, and then that flows back to these different committees, creating a sustainable business model that doesn't require things like advertising or different business models. Current organizations in the real world can take some examples of how we are encoding these decisions and create different mechanisms that have less chance for corruption, which have more security, more transparency on what is going on. The users have a lot more security that the mechanism is not very corrupt, or if they see certain power disbalances, they can voice their concerns and gather the community to change the rules of the DAO. So my question is whether DAOs will enable a new era for global coordination. I think that it has a lot of potential to reduce the overall amount of bureaucracy that we have in our systems. Through reducing that bureaucracy, we can just dedicate to more creative tasks. And I believe that, as we are seeing on Decentraland, more and more organizations and communities will start to at least replace some of the processes that they currently have. Of course, sometimes that complete transparency is a little problematic, but certain privacy techniques that have been developed in the past few years may allow for selective disclosure of the information that is required, and through cryptography, the honesty of the decisions can be audited and checked back. Another challenge or opportunity for DAOs in general are how to upgrade the code. In some sense, every time that the DAO of Decentraland introduces a different mechanism for making a decision, or a change in the balance that land or mana or the wearables can have in the decision, creates a problem that is similar to whether we should change the constitution or not. In some sense, it's a meta-governance problem. Who custodies the custodians? And it's a very dynamic new approach to organize societies and different organizations that I feel, if more organizations start to do that, start to have some of their processes on chain, then the different activities that the DAO could decide on could interact with the DAOs of other organizations, creating a collaborative effort and compounding improvement on overall all the different organizations. So I hope that you have enjoyed this small presentation. I don't know if we have time for questions or not, but I will be happy to answer some of them. Thank you for listening.